Hello everyone, how are you all? I hope you all are safe and healthy in this pandemic. Today we are going to start materials, metals and non-metals, which is chapter number 4 of your class 8 science book. Dear students, do you know what material is? Material is the matter of which the objects are made from. For example, the bridge is made up of iron. Here, the bridge is an object and iron is the material used for building up the bridge. Again, when I say that the table is made up of wood, here the table is an object and wood is the material used for making the table. Now, materials can be broadly divided into metals and non-metals. In this chapter, we have to read about the physical and chemical properties of metals and non-metals both. In this session, today we will discuss about the physical properties of metals and non-metals. So, let us start the video. Starting from the element and atom. A substance which cannot be broken down into two or more simpler substances by chemical reactions is called an element. For example, iron is an element because it cannot be broken down into two or more simpler substances by the usual method of carrying out any chemical reaction, such as by applying heat, light, or electricity. We cannot break down iron. Please note down that the elements themselves are the simplest substances. That is why they cannot be split up. Now, the smallest particle of an element is called atom. A sample of an element contains only one kind of atom. An element is a substance which is made up of only one kind of atom. There are as many type of atoms as are elements. So, different elements are made up of different kinds of atom. For example, sulfur element is made up of only sulfur atoms, whereas iron element is made up of only iron atoms. Moving to the next slide, the elements can be divided into two groups, metals and non-metals. Examples of metals are iron, copper, gold and silver, whereas the example of non-metals are oxygen, carbon, sulfur and chlorine. Out of 92 naturally occurring elements, 70 are metals and 22 are non-metals. All the metals are solid. There is one exception, which is mercury. Mercury is the metal which is liquid at room temperature. When we talk about non-metals, they are total 22, out of which 10 non-metals are solids, one non-metal is a liquid, whereas remaining 11 non-metals are gases. The one non-metal, which the name is bromine, is a liquid. Now, I will tell you a new term, that is metalloid. The elements whose properties are intermediate between those of metals and non-metals are known as metalloids. There are some metals which shows some properties of metals and the other properties of non-metals. They are known as metalloids. For example, metals are the good conductor of electricity, whereas non-metals do not conduct electricity at all. But metalloids conduct electricity to small extent under special circumstances. So, metalloids are semiconductors. The example of metalloids are silicon, germanium, arsenic, tellurium, etc. Now we will discuss about the physical properties of metals and non-metals one by one. The most important property is malleability. We all know that the property which allows the metals to be hammered into thin sheets is called malleability. Malleability is a very important characteristic property of metal, and most of the metals are malleable. Gold and silver are the best malleable metals and can be hammered into very fine sheets or foils. You must have heard about aluminium foils. The aluminium metals can be hammered to form thin aluminium foils. Similarly, the copper and iron are also quite malleable. Whereas when we talk about non-metals, they are not malleable. It means when we beat non-metal, it cannot be converted into sheets. It will break down into small pieces when we hammer it. The non-metals are brittle. What is brittleness? Actually, it is a property due to which the non-metals break on hammering. For example, the lid of the pencil which we use to write, the lid of the pencil is made up of graphite, which is a form of non-metal, that is carbon. So pencil lid breaks very easily. So we can say that the lid of the pencil is brittle. Moving to the next property, that is ductility. Metals are ductile, whereas non-metals are non-ductile. The definition of ductility is the property which allows the metals to be drawn into wires. Ductility is another characteristic property of metals. Generally, we can say that all metals are ductile. Copper and aluminium metals are very ductile. That's why they can be used to make copper wires and aluminium wires. Apart from this, gold, silver, iron, magnesium are also very ductile metals. When we talk about non-metals, they cannot be drawn into wire. They are easily snapped on stretching. For example, sulfur and phosphorus are non-metals and they are not ductile. When stretched, the sulfur and phosphorus, they break into pieces and they do not form wires. Thus, we can say that the non-metals are neither malleable nor ductile. Non-metals are brittle in nature. The next property is conductivity. As we all know that metals are the good conductors of heat and electricity. This means that the metals allows heat and electricity to pass through them very easily. Copper, silver, gold, aluminium and iron metals are good conductors of heat. Though all the metals are good conductor of heat, silver metal is the best conductor of heat. When we talk about non-metals, they are very poor conductor of heat and electricity. This means that non-metals do not allow heat and electricity to pass through them. For example, sulfur is a non-metal which does not allow electricity or heat to pass through them. Similarly, a piece of coal, which is mainly carbon non-metal, that also does not conduct heat or electricity. Many of the non-metals are poor conductor of heat and electricity. That means they are very good insulator. However, there are some exceptions here. I am going to tell you that a form of carbon element, diamond. Diamond is a non-metal which is a good conductor of heat. Another example, that is graphite. Graphite is a non-metal which is a good conductor of electricity. And being a good conductor of electricity, graphite is used for making electrodes, that in dry cells. Next property is luster. Luster means shiny. All the metals have a shiny appearance. If we observe the freshly cut surface of a metal, we will find that they have a shiny appearance, and this is called metallic luster or chamak in Hindi. The shiny appearance of metals makes them useful in making jewelries and decoration pieces. For example, you all know that gold and silver are used for making jewelries because they are bright and shiny, whereas non-metals are non-lustrous. They are dull. Here also one exception is that iodine. Iodine is a non-metal and having luster. Iodine has a shiny surface like that of metals. Moving to the next property, that is strength. The metals are usually very strong. They have very high tensile strength. This means that metals can hold large weights without snapping. That means without breaking. For example, iron metal in the form of steel is very strong. It is having a very high tensile strength, and due to this, iron metal is used in the construction of bridges, buildings, railway lines, machines, vehicles, chains, etc. Now, most of the metals are strong, but some of the metals are not strong. For example, sodium and potassium metals, they are not strong and they have low tensile strength. When we talk about non-metals, they are not at all strong. They have low tensile strength. That means that non-metals cannot hold large weight. They are easily snapped. For example, graphite is a non-metal which is not strong. It has a low tensile strength. So, when a large weight is placed on a graphite sheet, it gets snapped. That means it breaks down very easily. Next physical properties of metal and non-metal is sonorousness. Sonorous means capable of producing a ringing sound. If we drop a metal coin or a metal utensil on the floor in our house, what happens? We hear a ringing sound. And when a clapper or a hammer of an electric bell strikes the metal gong, then what happens? Then also we hear a ringing sound. So the metals are sonorous. We can say that the metals produce ringing sound. They are sonorous. Whereas the non-metals are not capable of producing a ringing sound, therefore they are not sonorous. For example, if we drop a piece of charcoal, which is a form of carbon, or a lump of sulfur on the floor or strike them with a hammer, we do not hear any ringing sound. This means that carbon and sulfur are non-metal and they are not sonorous. They are not capable of producing a ringing sound. Moving to next and the last property, that is hardness. The metals are generally hard. This means that most of the metals cannot be cut easily. For example, iron metal cannot be cut, cannot be broken down very easily. We find very difficult to cut a sheet of iron. Why is this? This is because the iron metal is very hard. On the other hand, a thin sheet of aluminium metal can be cut by the help of scissor. This means that aluminium metal is less hard. Actually, the hardness of the metal varies from one metal to another metal. When we talk about sodium and potassium metal, they are soft and they can be easily cut with the help of a knife. When we talk about non-metals, most of the solid non-metals are quite soft. This means they most of the solid non-metals can be cut very easily. For example, sulfur and phosphorus are soft non-metals which can be easily cut into pieces with a knife. Only one non-metal, that is diamond, is very hard. In fact, diamond is the hardest natural substance known. Now, as we have discussed all the properties, all the physical properties of metals and non-metals, so now we are able to compare the physical properties of metal and non-metal in tabular form. Here, the first point you can see that the metals are solid. Exception was the mercury, as I have already told you, and non-metals may be solid, liquid and gas. The name of liquid non-metal is bromine. Don't forget that. Next point is that the metals are hard except sodium and potassium, whereas the non-metals which are solid, they are brittle, and diamond is the hardest, that is the exception. The metals are having luster, the metals are shiny, whereas the non-metals do not have luster, they are dull. The metals have high melting and boiling points, whereas the non-metals have low melting point. Next point is metals are malleable. They can be made into sheets, whereas non-metals are non-malleable. Metals are ductile. They can be drawn into wires, whereas non-metals are not ductile. Metals are good conductor of heat and electricity, whereas non-metals are bad conductor, that is poor conductor of heat and electricity. Here graphite is the exception. Metals are sonorous, they produce ringing sound, whereas non-metals are not sonorous. So, an element can be identified as being a metal or a non-metal by comparing its properties with the general properties of metals and non-metals. So, while doing so, we should, however, keep the various exceptions to the general properties of metal and non-metal in mind. So, in our next video, we will discuss about the chemical properties of metals and non-metals. Thank you so much for watching.